My name is Lindsay Cartwright, and I'm a Senior Data Analyst with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. I would like to start by acknowledging my co-authors who were heavily involved in several aspects of this work, including conceptualization, site selection, fieldwork, and review. Today I will be presenting the results of research that was conducted at a finer scale than the landscape scale modeling that Dr. Chin just presented. We used the landscape scale modeling combined with future road improvement projects to determine several sites where more detailed information could be collected to inform the planning process. The work that I'll be presenting today is part of a larger program that seeks to understand the impacts of roads on regional biodiversity and habitat connectivity, identify appropriate mitigation measures to inform transportation planning, and monitor effectiveness of mitigation measures over the long term. Today I'll be summarizing data on wildlife vehicle collisions that was collected in 2018 and 2019 at 6 sites in the Greater Toronto Area. Each of these sites was identified as habitat connectivity priority areas. At each specific site, we determined the number of wildlife vehicle collisions, the species affected, seasonal patterns, and hotspots for movements within each site. We looked at species both at the taxa level as well as at the species specific level if they could be identified to that level. And we also considered whether or not the species were species at risk or species ranked L1 to L3, which basically means that these are species of regional conservation concern within the Toronto area. And this is based on a scoring and ranking system that was developed for the jurisdiction. Species ranked L1 are the most sensitive species. They are most sensitive to development. They have declining population trends. They are area sensitive. They are also subject to isolation effects if patches become isolated on the landscape. Whereas species at the other end would be L5, all the way to the other end. And these are species that might have increasing population trends, are not really area sensitive, can live in association with humans. And so L1 to L3, though, for our jurisdiction are generally considered to be those of regional conservation concern. This study took place in the Toronto region of Canada, which is an area supporting both the country's largest city and a large number of wildlife species due to its geographic location. This map shows the location of the 6 study sites selected based on connectivity priority and identified in the regional transportation master plans as undergoing construction within the next 10 years. You can see the green on this map indicates where there is natural cover, and the jurisdiction generally has a higher urban footprint down in the southern portion, whereas the more northern areas are more rural landscapes with habitat patches generally fragmented by a more agricultural landscape. We collected wildlife vehicle collision data using a standardized methodology, and it involved walking a consistent length of road and recording all species and individuals, dead, injured, or alive, along the road, along with the UTM coordinates. Surveys were conducted between April 5th and November 5th in 2018 and 2019 under variable weather conditions and on a cycle of night and day visits. A total of 8,778 wildlife vehicle collisions were recorded in this study at all of the 6 sites combined in 2018 and 2019. Frogs and toads accounted for a disproportionately large number of the wildlife vehicle collisions, representing 89%. Other taxa represented a smaller portion, including mammals, snakes, birds, newts and salamanders, turtles, and invertebrates. While many wildlife vehicle collisions could only be identified to the taxa level, of the 2,703 that could be identified to species, 54% were fauna species of regional concern. The disproportionately large number of frog and toad collisions was also apparent in the species level data, with American toad, gray tree frog, green frog, northern leopard frog, spring peeper, and wood frog having the highest number of wildlife vehicle collisions. The species level data also suggested that populations of 2 species at risk, Jefferson salamander and common snapping turtle, are also affected at specific sites. This knowledge helped to inform further work that my colleague David Laurie will be discussing in the next presentation. There was seasonal variation in the number of wildlife vehicle collisions by taxa. Along the x-axis shows the seasons, spring, summer, and fall, and the y-axis shows the proportion of all collisions. Frog and toad wildlife vehicle collisions were the highest in the summer, while snake, newt, and salamander wildlife vehicle collisions were highest in the fall. Turtle, bird, and mammal wildlife vehicle collisions were highest in the spring. In addition to seasonality, we also looked at the influence of several weather variables on the number of wildlife vehicle collisions for herptiles that were occurring at the sites. What we found was that both air temperature and relative humidity levels leading up to the days, in the days leading up to when the survey was conducted, had the highest influence, a strong positive correlation with the number of herptile wildlife vehicle collisions, suggesting that these times are especially important times to consider for wildlife movements. While frogs and toads dominated the number and proportion of wildlife vehicle collisions at all sites, there was variability in wildlife vehicle collisions for other taxa among sites. Mountain View and Teston had the highest proportion of frog and toad wildlife vehicle collisions compared to other sites. Airport and Goreway had a higher proportion of bird and mammal wildlife vehicle collisions compared to other sites. Goreway had the highest proportion of snake wildlife vehicle collisions. Stouffville had the highest proportion of newt and salamander wildlife vehicle collisions. And the Gore had the highest proportion of turtle collisions at all sites. And this suggests that the sites are different and might need different types of mitigation. These data have been even further summarized to understand the specific species affected at each site, including the large number of Jefferson salamanders at Stouffville, American bullfrogs at Mountain View, pickerel frogs at the Gore, red-belly snakes at Goreway, and the fact that porcupine had the highest number of wildlife vehicle collisions of all mammal species, with the highest numbers at the Gore. So these more site-specific and species-specific information can provide us with a lot of important information on what species are moving, where, and when combining that with the seasonal work as well, even when at each site. So we can be very specific with the type of mitigation to ensure there are the best outcomes possible. For site-specific assessments of wildlife vehicle collisions, we examined seasonal patterns related to when the wildlife vehicle collisions were occurring, as shown in this graph on the left, and we also identified hotspots for wildlife crossings using kernel density tool in ArcGIS. This example shows Teston Road, and so you can see when different taxa are moving throughout the season, and this could inform things like road closures. And then also you can see on the right where there have been 3 hotspots identified, and with the most east hotspot resulting in more wildlife vehicle collisions than the other 2. In addition to the detailed site level data to inform planning and mitigation, this was also an opportunity to explore the extent of the issue of wildlife vehicle collisions within the jurisdiction. We used the data collected in 2018 and 2019 to estimate, predict, and try to extrapolate the number of wildlife vehicle collisions occurring in a single season on major roads in the rural area of the jurisdiction. Using several assumptions, including the assumption that these sites reflect wildlife vehicle collision patterns on all major roads in the jurisdiction, we predict that approximately 1.2 million wildlife vehicle collisions occur in a single season on major roads in the rural area of the jurisdiction. Overall, the results of this work suggest that wildlife vehicle collisions are a major threat to wildlife population persistence in the Toronto region. And this is due to the large number of individuals we're seeing involved in collisions at each of the sites, the fact that over 50% of the individuals involved in these collisions are species of regional conservation concern or species at risk, and also the fact that this extrapolated value of 1.2 million suggests that there's a staggering number of collisions that could be happening in the rural area of the jurisdiction on major roads. The results of this work can be used to prioritize sites for mitigation, determine where to install wildlife passages within the road segments and what species to target for those passages, also when to restrict traffic as well to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. We can also hopefully use this extrapolated number of 1.2 million to raise awareness of the severity of the issue within the region. It is important to avoid the negative effects of roads through proper planning to avoid natural features prior to construction, and mitigating the impacts during and post-construction if avoiding natural features is not possible. We would like to acknowledge the contributions of several other individuals to this project, including those that conducted the fieldwork. We would also like to acknowledge funding support from our municipal partners, Peel and York Region. Thank you.